ballroom looked like something out of a magazine. Tall windows reached from the polished floor to the high ceiling, letting in the soft glow of evening lights from the city outside. Crystal chandeliers hung above long tables dressed in white cloth and gold trim. Glasses clinked gently as guests talked in calm, confident voices. Everything about the place said comfort, success, and money. Among the guests in tailored suits and elegant dresses, there was someone most people did not notice. She moved quietly along the edges of the room, carrying trays, checking tables, and making sure glasses stayed full. Her uniform blended in with the rest of the staff, neat and plain. She kept her head slightly lowered, not out of fear, but out of habit. At events like this, the service staff learned to become invisible. She had worked many events before, but this one felt different the moment she stepped inside. The room was larger, the crowd more polished, and the energy more intense. Important people had gathered here, people who spoke about investments, art, and travel as if these things were simple parts of everyday life. She listened without meaning to while moving between them, careful not to interrupt. At one end of the room stood a grand piano. It was black, glossy, and perfectly placed beneath a spotlight. The lid was open, the keys clean and waiting. It was not there by accident. Everyone knew a professional musician would play later in the evening. For now, it sat in silence, like a promise waiting to be kept. As she passed the piano for the first time, her steps slowed. Only for a moment. Her eyes flicked toward the keys, then away again. She reminded herself why she was there. She adjusted the tray in her hands and kept walking. Work first. Always work first. The event moved forward smoothly. Guests arrived in small groups, greeting each other with warm smiles and practiced confidence. Laughter rose and fell like gentle waves. Soft background music played through hidden speakers, filling the space without demanding attention. Everything was controlled, planned, and elegant. She noticed small details most people missed. A guest who kept tapping their glass, lost in thought. Another who stared too long at the city lights, as if remembering something far away. These moments passed quickly, unnoticed by others, but she saw them all. Watching people had always come naturally to her. Every now and then, her eyes drifted back to the piano. She tried not to let them linger. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to think about music. Life had a way of closing doors quietly, without asking permission. Dreams did not disappear all at once. They faded slowly, replaced by responsibilities and hard choices. As she moved through the crowd, a guest asked for another drink. She smiled politely and nodded, doing exactly what was expected. Her smile was calm, professional, and practiced. No one would guess what was happening inside her chest each time she passed that stage. The piano reminded her of rooms much smaller than this one. Rooms with worn floors and open windows. Of hours spent practicing while the world outside carried on. Of hands learning patterns, mistakes turning into understanding. Those memories stayed with her, quiet but alive. A short break came as the guests settled into deeper conversations. The staff gathered briefly near the back of the room, checking notes and adjusting schedules. She took a sip of water and leaned lightly against the wall, careful not to wrinkle her uniform. Her feet ached, but she was used to that. From where she stood, she could see the piano clearly. The light above it made the black surface shine. No one stood near it. For a moment, it felt like it was looking back at her. As strange as that thought was. She shook her head slightly, reminding herself not to get lost in ideas that had no place here. A voice nearby pulled her attention back. Two guests were talking about the music planned for later. One mentioned how impressed they were that the organizers had secured a well-known performer. The other nodded, saying it would be nice to hear something truly refined after a long week. She listened while pretending not to. The words were not meant for her, but they reached her all the same. Refined, well-known, professional. These were not words people used to describe someone in a service uniform. The thought passed, and she returned to her work. Plates were cleared, glasses replaced, small requests handled with speed and care. The event flowed on, smooth and predictable. That predictability was comforting in a way. It meant fewer surprises, fewer moments where she might slip. Yet something about the night refused to settle. A quiet tension hung in the air, unnoticed by most, but felt deeply by her. She could not explain it. Perhaps it was the piano. Perhaps it was the way the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. She remembered the first time she had ever touched piano keys. The memory came without warning, warm and clear. The feeling of cool ivory beneath her fingers. The surprise of sound responding to touch. That sense of control mixed with freedom. She swallowed gently and pushed the memory aside. A staff supervisor passed by, giving quick instructions. She nodded and followed them without question. She had learned long ago that staying focused kept life simple. Looking back only made the present harder. As the evening moved closer to the planned performance time, the crowd grew louder. Excitement built in small ways. Guests shifted their chairs toward the stage, voices rising with anticipation. The piano no longer felt like just another piece of decoration. It had become the center of attention. She stood near the side of the room, waiting for the next task. From this angle, she could see both the guests and the piano at once. For a brief moment, her reflection caught in the piano's polished surface. She barely recognized herself there, standing between two worlds that rarely touched. No one noticed her pause. No one saw the way her hands flexed slightly at her sides, as if remembering movements they had not made in years. The music in the speakers softened, preparing to fade out. Soon, the scheduled performer would arrive, and the night would continue as planned. She took a slow breath and straightened her shoulders. Whatever this feeling was, it would pass. It always did. She was here to work, nothing more. Still, as she looked once more at the silent piano, a quiet thought crossed her mind, gentle but persistent. What if some moments are not meant to stay silent forever? She pushed the thought away as footsteps approached and another guest asked for assistance. With a polite smile, she stepped forward, blending once again into the rhythm of the event. The piano remained untouched, waiting, while the night moved closer to a moment no one could yet imagine. The night continued to move forward, but the feeling in the room began to change in small, quiet ways. Guests shifted in their seats more often now, glancing toward the stage where the piano waited. Conversations grew shorter, breaking off and restarting as people checked their watches or scanned the entrance. Everyone knew the performance time was getting close. She stayed busy, moving from table to table, responding to soft calls and raised hands. Her body followed routine, but her mind felt restless. Each step toward the stage pulled something inside her tighter, like a string drawn too far. She reminded herself again that this had nothing to do with her. This was someone else's moment. Near the back of the room, a small group of guests spoke louder than the others. Their laughter carried easily across the space. One of them noticed the piano and joked about how quiet it had been all evening. Another added that it would be awkward if the performer failed to show up. The idea was meant as humor, but it lingered in the air longer than expected. She passed by them with a tray and caught those words without trying to. Her heart skipped once, then settled. Performers always showed up. These events were planned carefully. There were backups, schedules, contracts. Everything was under control. Still, when she glanced toward the side entrance reserved for performers, it remained empty. A staff member whispered something to the supervisor. Their faces were calm, but their movements became quicker. Phones came out, messages were checked, and quiet instructions were exchanged. Most guests did not notice, but she did. Years of watching people had taught her how to read small changes. She felt a strange mix of concern and curiosity. Not for the event, but for the silence growing around the piano. The background music faded a little, then came back, as if someone had adjusted it without meaning to. A guest near the stage stood up and stretched, looking around with mild impatience. Another raised their phone, recording a short clip of the room. The night was starting to feel less perfect, less polished. She stepped aside to refill her tray at a service table. Her hands moved steadily, but her thoughts wandered. She wondered where the performer was. She wondered why her chest felt tight, as if she were waiting for something she had no right to wait for. The supervisor approached her and asked if she could cover another section for a few minutes. She nodded without hesitation. More walking, more work. That was good. It would keep her grounded. As she moved closer to the stage area, the piano seemed larger somehow. The light above it had been adjusted, growing brighter, more focused. It felt like a spotlight searching for someone who wasn't there yet. She stopped briefly near the edge of the stage, careful to keep distance. From here, she could see the keys clearly. The smooth curve of the piano's body reflected the ceiling lights. It looked untouched, almost lonely in the middle of such a busy room. A guest standing nearby noticed her pause and smiled politely. "Beautiful instrument," they said, more to themselves than to her. She nodded in agreement, unsure why her throat felt tight. "Yes," she replied softly. That was all she could manage. The guest went on to say how music had a way of changing the mood of a room. How the right melody could make people forget where they were for a moment. She listened, nodding, feeling each word land deeper than expected. Then, from across the room, a quiet murmur spread. It moved like a wave, starting small and growing as it traveled. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Someone had asked about the performer again. The supervisor stepped onto the stage briefly, holding a microphone. Their voice was calm, professional, and reassuring. They explained there would be a short delay and thanked everyone for their patience. Polite applause followed, but it carried a hint of uncertainty. She stood still, watching from the side. A delay was not a disaster, but it cracked the smooth surface of the evening. For the first time, the event felt fragile. As the supervisor stepped off the stage, they glanced toward the staff area, their eyes briefly meeting hers. There was no message in the look, just a moment of shared awareness. Something unexpected was happening. She looked down at her hands. They were steady, strong. Hands that had learned patterns long ago. Hands that remembered more than she allowed herself to think about. A memory rose without warning. Sitting at a worn piano bench, feet barely touching the floor, repeating the same passage until it felt natural. A voice nearby offering quiet guidance. That memory felt both close and far away. She shook her head gently, as if to clear it. Another guest near the stage laughed lightly and said, "Anyone here know how to play?" It was meant as a joke. A harmless comment to fill the silence. A few people smiled. Someone else responded that this was not that kind of event. She kept her eyes down, but her heart pounded. The words echoed louder than they should have. The delay stretched on. The background music faded again, then stopped completely. The room grew quieter, more aware of itself. Without music, every sound stood out. A cough, a chair shifting, the soft clink of glass. She felt exposed standing there, though no one was looking at her. The quiet pressed in, heavy and full of possibility. The supervisor returned to the staff area, speaking quickly with a few people. There was concern now, clear but controlled. Phones were checked again. Heads shook. She overheard a fragment of conversation. Traffic. A missed connection. Uncertain timing. Her breath caught. This was real. The performer might not arrive in time. Guests began whispering again, curiosity replacing impatience. Some looked amused, others mildly annoyed. A few leaned forward, clearly enjoying the unpredictability of it all. She stood frozen for a moment, caught between roles. The part of her that knew she was here to serve, and another part, quieter but stronger than she remembered, that felt pulled toward the stage. She imagined sitting at the piano, just for a moment, just to fill the silence. The thought scared her. What would people think? What would happen if she made a mistake? She was not dressed for this. She did not belong there. And yet the room waited. A guest's voice broke through her thoughts. "It's such a shame," they said. "All this build-up, and no music." She swallowed and took a slow breath. Some moments, she realized, do not ask permission. They arrive quietly and wait to see who will answer. She didn't move. Not yet. But something inside her shifted, settling into a calm she had not felt in years. Whatever happened next, the night was no longer ordinary. The piano remained silent, but it no longer felt empty. Felt ready. And so did she. The quiet in the room began to feel uncomfortable. It was no longer the polite pause of a planned event, but a silence filled with waiting eyes and restless thoughts. Guests shifted again, some leaning toward each other to whisper, others staring openly at the empty stage. The piano sat under the light, no longer just waiting, but almost asking. She stood near the side, holding her tray a little tighter than before. Her breathing was slow, but deep. Every sound felt louder now. The soft slide of shoes on the floor, the faint hum of the lights above. Even her own heartbeat seemed too loud in her ears. The supervisor stepped onto the stage again, microphone in hand. This time, the smile looked forced. They explained that there was an unexpected delay and asked for a little more patience. The words were calm, but the room sensed the truth behind them. Something had gone wrong. A few guests clapped politely. Others didn't bother. One person laughed and said it was becoming interesting. Another checked their phone and shook their head. She watched all of this from the side, feeling like she was standing between two versions of herself. One that belonged right where she was, unnoticed and safe. Another that felt strangely awake, like it had been asleep for years and was suddenly called by name. The background music did not return this time. The silence stayed. Someone near the front spoke up, their voice clear in the quiet room. Is there really no music tonight? The question was not rude, but honest. The supervisor hesitated for a moment. That hesitation changed everything. A small crack in control, but enough for the room to feel it. She felt her hands grow warm. Her fingers moved slightly, as if stretching without her permission. Muscle memory waking up. A laugh came from the crowd. Maybe someone here can play, a guest said again, louder this time. It was meant as a joke, but curiosity followed the words. Several heads turned, scanning the room. Eyes passed over her without stopping. She told herself to stay still, to stay quiet. This was not her place. But then something unexpected happened. A guest near the stage noticed her standing there and smiled. You work here, right? They asked kindly. Yes, she answered, keeping her voice steady. You were looking at the piano earlier, the guest said, not accusing, just observant. Do you play? The question hung in the air between them. Felt heavy even though it was asked so simply. She could have laughed it off. She could have said no and walked away. That would have been easy. Instead, she paused. I used to, she said quietly. The guest raised their eyebrows, interested. Really? Before she could say anything else, another person nearby heard and leaned in. You play piano? They asked, surprised. Her heart raced. She felt exposed, like a light had turned on inside her. I haven't played in a long time, she added quickly, hoping that would end it. But it didn't. Well, the guest said, glancing toward the stage. It seems like the piano is free. There was no pressure in their voice, only curiosity. Still, the suggestion felt huge. She shook her head slightly. I'm working, she said. And I'm not. I'm not dressed for that. The guest smiled gently. Music doesn't care about clothes. She didn't know how to respond to that. The supervisor noticed the small group forming and walked over. Their expression was tired but alert. Is everything okay here? They asked. The guest gestured toward her. They play piano, they said casually, as if mentioning a hobby. The supervisor looked at her, surprised. You do. She felt every eye on her now. The room seemed to shrink. I did, she repeated. A long time ago. The supervisor glanced toward the stage, then back at her. There was a long pause. In that pause, 1,000 thoughts seemed to pass across their face. Risk, timing, the mood of the room. I'm not asking you to perform, the supervisor said carefully. But, would you be willing to try? Just to fill the space for a few minutes. Her mouth went dry. Try. The word echoed in her head. This was no longer a joke whispered between guests. This was real. A choice. She looked at the piano again. The light. The bench. The keys she knew so well once. Fear rose first. Fear of failure. Fear of being judged. Fear of remembering who she used to be. Then something else followed. A quiet excitement. A feeling she had missed without realizing it. "I don't know if I can," she said honestly. The supervisor nodded. "That's okay. No pressure. Just thought I'd ask." They turned slightly, ready to move on. She surprised herself by speaking again. "If I do, it would just be something simple." The supervisor turned back, hope flickering in their eyes. "That would be more than enough." The guests nearby watched closely now. The room felt alive again, buzzing with curiosity. She took a deep breath. Her legs felt heavy, but steady. She handed her tray to another staff member, who accepted it without question, eyes wide. Each step toward the stage felt unreal. The distance was short, but it felt like crossing a line she had avoided for years. She reached the piano and paused. From this close, it looked even more beautiful. The keys were smooth and cool beneath her fingers when she touched them lightly. A murmur spread through the crowd. Phones were raised. Whispers filled the room. She sat down slowly on the bench. It was lower than she remembered. She adjusted her position just like she used to. For a moment, she did nothing. She closed her eyes. The room disappeared. All that remained was her, the piano, and the quiet space between the first note and the next. She placed her hands on the keys. They trembled slightly, then steadied. She pressed one key. The sound was soft, clear, and real. A second note followed. Then another. The room held its breath. She let her fingers move slowly, carefully. She chose a simple melody, one she knew by heart, one that felt safe. As the notes filled the space, something inside her loosened. The fear faded. The years fell away. She was not a staff member now. She was not invisible. She was playing. And the crowd was listening. The first notes floated gently through the room, almost unsure of themselves. They were soft and careful, like footsteps on a quiet floor. No one spoke. Even those who had been whispering fell silent, drawn in without realizing it. The sound was not loud, not dramatic, but it was real. Carried a feeling that could not be ignored. She kept her eyes on the keys, afraid that if she looked up, the moment would break. Her fingers moved slowly, guided by memory rather than thought. Each note followed the last with quiet confidence. The piano responded warmly, filling the space in a way the background music never had. A guest near the front lowered their phone slightly, forgetting to record for a second. Another leaned forward in their chair. A few people exchanged looks, surprised by how quickly the room had changed. She breathed out as she played, letting the tension leave her shoulders. The melody was simple, but it carried emotion. It spoke of patience, of waiting, of holding something close even when life pulls it away. As the music continued, her hands grew steadier. The slight tremble faded. The piano felt familiar again, like an old friend that did not ask questions about the years apart. The sound reached every corner of the ballroom. Conversations were gone now. Glasses rested untouched on tables. Even the staff paused, standing still along the walls, watching quietly. A guest who had seemed impatient earlier now sat completely still, eyes fixed on her hands. Another slowly closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. She added more depth to the melody, her fingers moving with growing confidence. The notes rose and fell, filling the room with a calm energy. It was not a performance meant to impress. It was a story told without words. She did not think about the crowd anymore. She did not think about her uniform or the delay, or what might happen next. The piano held her attention fully. Each note reminded her why she had loved music in the first place. The room felt different now. Softer, warmer. The sharp edge of expectation melted away, replaced by something honest. A quiet gasp came from somewhere in the crowd when she shifted into a slightly more complex passage. It was subtle, but skilled ears noticed. This was not luck. This was understanding. She felt it too. The way her hands knew where to go before her mind caught up. The way the piano answered her touch exactly as she remembered. A few guests glanced at each other, their expressions changing from curiosity to disbelief. This was not something they had expected from a night that had nearly fallen apart. The supervisor stood near the stage, watching closely. Their earlier worry was gone, replaced by something like relief and wonder. She let the music grow just a little stronger, letting emotion guide her. The melody deepened, carrying hints of longing and hope. It was the kind of music that made people think of moments they had forgotten. One guest wiped at their eyes without realizing it. Another sat with their hands folded, breathing slowly, as if afraid to disturb the sound. The piano was no longer just an instrument in the room. It had become the heart of the event. She felt tears rise, but she did not stop. She had learned long ago how to play through emotion, how to let it become part of the sound instead of a distraction. The notes flowed more freely now. Her confidence grew with every second. She was no longer filling time. She was creating something meaningful. The crowd leaned in as if pulled closer by the music. Phones were held steady now, not shaking with excitement but frozen in quiet respect. The city lights outside the windows blurred softly, unnoticed. The chandeliers above seemed less bright compared to the warmth coming from the piano. She played as if the room belonged to her, as if the years away had never happened. The melody carried her forward, note by note. A deep silence followed as she reached the end of the piece. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys. The last note faded slowly, hanging in the air. For a moment no one moved. The silence was heavy, full of feeling. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something powerful. Then someone began to clap. The sound broke the stillness like a wave. Applause spread quickly, growing louder with each passing second. People stood up, clapping with genuine excitement. She looked up for the first time. Faces stared back at her, not with judgment, but with amazement. Her heart raced. She stood slowly, unsure what to do. This was not part of her job. This was not planned. The applause continued. Some guests smiled broadly. Others nodded in respect. A few called out softly, thanking her. She felt overwhelmed, but also strangely calm. The fear she had carried earlier was gone. She stepped back from the piano, hands shaking slightly now that the moment had passed. The supervisor approached her, eyes shining. "That was incredible," they said quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. The crowd slowly settled, but the energy in the room had changed completely. What had begun as an awkward delay had turned into something unforgettable. As she returned to the side of the room, people watched her with new eyes. She was no longer invisible. The piano sat quietly again, but it no longer felt empty. She knew, deep inside, that this night had already changed something, and the story was far from over. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind stayed in the air. People did not rush back to their conversations right away. Many remained standing, still facing the stage, as if hoping the moment might return if they waited long enough. The room no longer felt like just another luxury event. It felt personal now. She stood near the side, her hands folded together, unsure where to place herself. A few minutes ago, she had been part of the background. Now, she felt every glance, every quiet look of curiosity. It was not uncomfortable, but it was unfamiliar. Guests began approaching her one by one. They were polite, respectful, and genuinely curious. Someone thanked her for the music. Another said they had not expected to feel so moved that evening. She smiled and nodded, choosing her words carefully. She did not know how to explain what the moment had meant to her. The supervisor returned to the stage briefly to explain that the scheduled performer would not be arriving. There was no disappointment this time. Instead, there was soft laughter and understanding. Some even clapped again. As the crowd relaxed, conversations restarted, but they were different now. People spoke more softly. The sharp tone of status and business was replaced by warmth. The music had shifted something deeper than the schedule. She was asked again and again where she had learned to play. Each time she answered honestly but simply. She said she learned long ago. She said life had taken her in another direction. She did not go into details. One guest asked why she had stopped. The question was gentle, not demanding. She paused before answering. Sometimes, she said, you do what you must before you do what you love. The guest nodded, understanding more than words could explain. Staff members looked at her differently now too. Some smiled with pride. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few whispered that they had no idea. She felt a strange mix of emotions. Joy, relief, and a quiet sadness for all the years she had kept that part of herself hidden. Later, the supervisor asked her to sit with them for a moment. They spoke away from the crowd, voices low. You didn't have to do that, the supervisor said. But I'm glad you did. She nodded. So am I. They asked if she had ever played professionally. She shook her head. Not like that. Just lessons. Practice. Small rooms. The supervisor looked thoughtful. You have real skill, they said. That doesn't disappear. The words stayed with her. As the night continued, a few influential guests asked for her contact information. They spoke about music programs, private events, and opportunities. She listened carefully, not making promises, not saying no either. Everything felt unreal, like a door opening slowly. She worried it might all vanish by morning. That this was just a beautiful accident, a moment that would live only in memory. Yet, something inside her had already changed. Even if nothing else came from this night, she had played again. She had been heard. Later, when the crowd thinned and tables were cleared, she passed the piano one last time. She rested her hand on it briefly, feeling the smooth surface beneath her palm. Thank you, she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was thanking. As she left the ballroom, the city lights outside looked different. Brighter, closer. The night air felt lighter on her skin. She walked home quietly, replaying the sound of the music in her mind. The fear was gone now, replaced by possibility. She did not know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not let that part of herself go silent again. The days after the event passed slowly at first. Life did not change overnight, not in obvious ways. She still woke up early, still worked long hours, still moved through busy rooms doing her job with care. But something inside her had shifted, and she could feel it in quiet moments, when the world slowed down. She found herself thinking about the piano more often, not with sadness, but with a steady warmth. The memory of that night stayed clear in her mind. The light on the stage, the silence before the first note, the way the room had listened. Messages began to arrive. First, she thought it was a mistake. Then another came, and another. People she had met briefly at the event reached out, thanking her again, asking questions, offering encouragement. Some asked if she would consider playing again someday. She read each message carefully, taking her time to reply. She did not rush into anything. For years, she had learned to be cautious with hope. One message stood out. It was simple and respectful. An invitation to visit a small music space. Nothing fancy, just a place where people gathered to play and listen. No pressure, no expectations. She hesitated before answering. Old doubts tried to return, whispering that one good night did not change everything, that she should stay where she was comfortable. But then she remembered the sound of the piano filling the ballroom. She remembered how it felt to be fully present, fully herself. She agreed to visit. The room was nothing like the luxury event. It was smaller, quieter, and warm. A few chairs, a piano that showed signs of age, and walls that carried the marks of time. Felt real, honest. She sat at the piano again, her hands familiar with the keys. There was no spotlight this time, no crowd holding its breath, just a few people listening closely. She played. The music came easily now. Not perfect, but true. She felt connected again, not to applause, but to the sound itself. Afterward, someone smiled and said they hoped she would come back. She smiled too. She hoped so as well. Weeks passed, and she began to make space for music in her life again. Slowly, carefully, she practiced when she could. She listened to old pieces she once loved and discovered new ones. She did not quit her job. Not yet. She respected the life she had built, even if it had been shaped by sacrifice. But she no longer saw music as something she had lost. It was something she was returning to. One evening, as she played alone, she stopped and rested her hands on the keys. She thought about the girl she had been years ago, dreaming in small rooms. She wished she could tell her that the dream did not disappear. It only waited. The luxury event became a story people shared. Not loudly, not everywhere, but enough. A reminder that talent does not always stand in the spotlight. Sometimes it works quietly, waiting for the right moment. She did not chase attention. She did not need to. What mattered was that she had found her voice again. On another night, at another event, a piano waited in the corner of a room. This time she was invited, not asked in surprise. She walked toward it with calm steps and sat down without fear. When she played, the sound carried the same honesty as before. The same warmth. The same truth. She understood now that moments like the first one were rare, but their meaning lasted. Life would still be busy. Challenges would still come. But she would not turn away from what made her feel alive. The piano had not changed her life by itself. She had changed it by choosing to listen to the quiet pull inside her. And every time her fingers touched the keys, she remembered that even in the most unexpected places, something beautiful can begin. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment of courage, and a room full of strangers willing to listen.